Before the water rose, before the sky broke open and did not stop for 40 days, before every living thing outside one wooden hull was erased from the face of the earth, there were giants. And after the water fell, after the ark settled on a mountain and a rainbow was hung in the clouds as a promise that this would never happen again, there were giants still. That is the problem no one wants to look at directly. The flood was supposed to be the reset, the end of corruption, the end of the strange union between the sons of God and the daughters of men, the end of the Nephilim who walked the earth in the days before the water came. Genesis is clear about why the flood happened at all, and yet centuries later, when 12 men crept into the hill country of Canaan to scout a promised land, they came back trembling, saying they had seen giants there. Descendants, by name, of the very beings the flood was sent to wipe out. So either the flood failed, or something walked out of it that was never supposed to survive. Or the truth is stranger than either of those, and far older than the 12 men who stood shaking at the edge of that valley. Most people who know this story stop at the flood. Water rises, the wicked are judged, Noah steps onto dry land, and the slate is clean. That is the version told in Sunday classrooms and children's picture books, but the text itself does not let the story end there. Tucked into a single verse in Genesis, easy to read past, is a phrase that unravels the tidy ending. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Not before, afterward. The very word the flood was meant to erase reappears on the other side of it, as if the water touched everything except this one thing. That single word is the crack in the wall, and what waits behind it is a mystery historians, theologians, and storytellers have argued over for thousands of years. The valley of Eshkol lay quiet under a white sun. Grapes hung heavy on the vine, and the air smelled of dust and crushed thyme. 12 men moved through the rows in near silence, their sandals soft against the dry earth, sent north by Moses to see what kind of land God had promised and what kind of people already lived in it. One of them, Caleb, crouched low near a cluster of vines, cutting a single bunch of grapes so large it would take 2 men to carry it on a pole between them. He did not speak. His eyes were on the ridge above the valley, where smoke rose from a settlement built into the hillside like a fortress grown out of stone. Another spy, further back, froze. He had seen a figure cross an open field near the town wall, a man, if he could be called that, whose stride alone covered the length of 3 ordinary men. The spy did not call out. He simply stood there, and the wind, which had been moving steadily through the vineyard all afternoon, seemed to fall still, as though even the air did not want to be caught moving in that place. That night, camped just beyond the border, one of the 10 who had frozen finally spoke what the others had only been thinking. "We are like grasshoppers in their sight," he said, staring at the fire rather than the men around it. "And so we were in our own." No one answered him. The silence afterward said more than argument could have. Fear does not need a name. It only needs a memory, and theirs went back further than they knew. To understand why grown men, chosen leaders of their tribes, broke at the sight of a few tall figures on a distant hillside, you have to go back past Canaan, past the wilderness, past even the flood itself, to a time when the earth was young and something happened that Scripture describes but never fully explains. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. The offspring of that union were called Nephilim, a word that has been translated as giants, but that some scholars trace instead to a root meaning the fallen ones. Whatever they were, exactly, the text says they were mighty men, men of renown, and it says the earth became filled with violence because of them. Every inclination of the human heart, Scripture says, was only evil, continually. It was for this, not simply for the giants, but for the corruption that spread from that unnatural union, that God said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever," and set in motion the flood. Noah built the ark in obedience, plank by plank, while the world around him mocked the work of a man building a boat under a clear sky. The rain came anyway. It came for 40 days and covered the highest mountains, and everything that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Everything. That was the promise embedded in the judgment, not partial cleansing, but complete. The old world was to be erased entirely, and a new one begun through 8 people, and the animals sealed inside that single vessel. If the text stopped there, there would be no mystery at all. But it does not stop there. Genesis returns to that same word Nephilim centuries later, describing them not as a memory, but as a present reality once again on the earth. And when the 12 spies stood on the border of Canaan, they used a specific name for what they saw. The sons of Anak descended, they said, from the Nephilim. The question that follows is unavoidable. If the flood was total, how did they come back? There is no single answer Scripture gives outright, and that absence is exactly why the question has haunted readers for thousands of years. Some ancient interpreters believed the corruption never fully left, that whatever spiritual doorway had been opened before the flood was opened again afterward, in a second, smaller incursion, echoing the first. Others believed the bloodline survived through means the text does not record, perhaps through Noah's family itself, a possibility hinted at in later apocryphal writings that describe suspicion even falling on one of Noah's own descendants. Still others read it as a title reused rather than a literal bloodline, restored later warriors, so fearsome, so physically dominant, that the old name for the fallen ones was simply given to them again, a legend reattached to a new generation of tyrants. What all three explanations share is this: something about the corruption the flood was meant to end did not end. It resurfaced. And it resurfaced in the very land God had promised to give his people. Centuries after Eshkol, on the eastern side of the Jordan, King Og of Bashan rode out to meet Israel in open war rather than let them pass through his territory. He was, Scripture says, of the remnant of the Rephaim, another name tied to the same ancient lineage, and his iron bed, kept afterward as a kind of relic, measured over 13 feet long. Whole cities in that region were described as walled and fortified, specifically because of the size and strength of the people who had once ruled them. Og did not retreat when he saw the camp of Israel spread across the plain. He gathered his forces and marched, certain that no people wandering out of a desert could stand against a kingdom built on the bones of giants. His confidence was not arrogance to him, it was history. His ancestors had never been defeated. The land itself had shaped itself around their dominance for generations. He was wrong. Israel met him at Edrei, and in a single engagement, the king of Bashan, the last known ruler of that lineage east of the Jordan, was struck down, along with his sons and his people, until, Scripture says, none remained. The mountain that watched the battle did not change shape. The wind that carried the noise of it away did not slow, but something ancient, something that had walked the earth since before the flood in one form or another, ended that day on a battlefield most people have never heard of. An empire built on the memory of giants fell in an afternoon. The tension had been building since the vineyard at Eshkol. 10 spies who let fear write the story, and 2, Caleb and Joshua, who looked at the same giants and came to a different conclusion. 10 said the land eats its inhabitants alive. 2 said the giants are bread for us, their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. 10 voices against 2. The nation as a whole believed the 10, and because of that single choice, an entire generation who had left Egypt would die in the wilderness without ever setting foot in the land they feared. 40 years, one for every day, the spies had spent scouting a country they refused to trust God to conquer. The giants were not what kept Israel out of Canaan for a generation. Fear was. That is the turning point most retellings skip past. It was not that the giants were unbeatable, it was that unbelief, once it took hold in the camp, spread faster and did more damage than any army descended from the Nephilim ever could. The real threat was never on the hillside. It was already inside the camp, whispered around the fire the night Caleb tried, and failed, to silence it. What the story is actually revealing, underneath the giants and the flood and the long, strange lineage that connects them, is something about how corruption works. It does not need to be permanent to be dangerous. It only needs a doorway, and doorways, Scripture suggests, can be reopened. The flood dealt with a world entirely given over to violence, but it did not remove the capacity for that same darkness to return in a new form, in a new generation, wearing a different name. Sin, corruption, whatever you want to call the thing the flood was sent to answer, is not a single event that gets solved once. It is a pattern that keeps finding new doors. And the deeper insight is this: the giants in Canaan were never actually the test. They were the setting for the test. The real question put in front of Israel was never, can you defeat something larger than yourselves? It was, will you trust what you cannot yet see the outcome of? 10 men looked at giants and measured themselves against them. 2 men looked at the same giants and measured them against God. Same evidence, same land, same towering figures on the same ridge. 2 completely different conclusions, because the real battlefield was never the valley. It was the space between what they saw and what they believed. You have your own version of that valley. Maybe it is not a literal giant, but it feels like one. A diagnosis, a debt, a decision you have been putting off because the outcome feels too large to face. A fear so old you have stopped questioning whether it is even accurate anymore. The way those spies never questioned whether their grasshopper feeling was true or simply familiar. 10 of them let the size of the obstacle define the size of their God. 2 of them let the size of their God define the size of the obstacle. The difference between those 2 outcomes was never courage in the way we usually mean it. It was where they chose to place their attention. Whatever giant is standing on the ridge of your life right now, watching you the way that figure watched those 12 spies crossing the valley of Eshkol, the question was never whether it is real. It probably is. The question is, which report you are going to carry back to your own camp. The 10 men were not wrong about what they saw. They were wrong about what it meant. Somewhere, on some plain long since grown over, the descendants of a bloodline that outlived a flood were finally struck down, not because they had grown weaker, but because the ones who faced them had stopped counting giants and started counting on something larger than the giants. The land was never the miracle. The shift in what they were willing to believe was. So the flood did fall, complete and total, exactly as it was written to. And still, somehow, on the far side of that judgment, something ancient walked out into the light of a new world. Maybe that is not a contradiction in the text at all. Maybe it is the truest thing in it, that no ending is ever quite as final as it looks, and no darkness, once answered, stays answered on its own. It has to be faced again, generation after generation, valley after valley, by whoever is standing at the border when the giants come back into view.